Welcome to the Explainer. Let's jump right into this, because today we are looking at one of the single most famous narratives in human history, the classic Christmas story. Now, whether you know this story by heart or you're looking at it with completely fresh eyes, it's actually a super fascinating narrative built entirely on massive, shocking contrasts. It's a story that introduces these grand, world-changing claims, but then anchors them in the most rugged, everyday reality you could possibly imagine. I mean, really think about this for a second. How does a figure hailed as a mighty king, literally the savior of the world, start his life in an empty cow barn? It's just a profound paradox. If you were sitting down to write a story about a future king in the ancient world, you'd probably start it in a palace, right? Surrounded by guards, unlimited wealth, just really leaning into those traditional hero tropes. But the source material gives us the exact opposite of that. So in this explainer, we're going to map out exactly how this incredible paradox unfolds, step by step, and see why this narrative so powerfully subverts all of our expectations. Section 1. An Angel in Nazareth. The story begins. Okay, to truly understand this paradox, we've got to start at the very beginning, far, far away from any royal palace. Our story actually kicks off in a place called Nazareth. And as our source notes, Nazareth wasn't some bustling, influential capital. It was just a quiet, sleepy little town filled mostly with farmers and shepherds. And here we meet our two main characters, Mary and Joseph. Look at how the narrative establishes their traits. Mary is described as a kind, helpful, and obedient young woman who helped her parents out in the fields. And Joseph, he's described simply as a good and honest man. They're perfectly ordinary, virtuous people living really simple lives, just getting ready to get married. But as you'll see, their quiet, predictable lives are about to be completely upended. Just a few days before her engagement, Mary receives a highly unusual visitor in her room, and the visual descriptions we have here are absolutely striking. She wakes up to see a heavenly figure bathed in this pool of bright white light just floating beyond her window. He's wearing bright white robes with big silver wings fluttering behind him. Naturally, at first, she thinks she's dreaming. But no, it's the angel Gabriel, and he drops a shocking decree. Mary, do not be afraid. He will be hailed as the King of Jews and the Savior of mankind. He goes on to tell her that the Spirit of the Lord will take over her, and she's going to have a son who will literally be called the Son of God. Now, what's really wild about this narrative beat is Mary's reaction. Think about it. If an angel with silver wings suddenly appeared at your window with world-altering news, absolute panic might be the expected response. Sure, she was shocked at first, but she remained remarkably calm. She listened closely to what he had to say. She even asked a very practical, logical question. How was this even possible since she wasn't married? And finally, she gracefully accepted the task. Now, the source points out that getting pregnant before marriage was incredibly unusual and super risky in those days. But she went and explained everything to Joseph, and because he was a genuinely good man, he accepted the whole shebang and married her anyway. Section 2. Journey to Bethlehem. A difficult path. As if an unexpected miraculous pregnancy wasn't enough to deal with, the narrative suddenly shifts gears and throws in a major external complication. The king of the land announces a census. Every single citizen has to go all the way back to their ancestral hometown just to get documented. And because Joseph is from Bethlehem, they have to pack up their lives and go. We're talking a grueling, absolutely exhausting journey by donkey across the desert. Obviously, there were no cars back then. They had to travel by foot. You have a heavily pregnant Mary riding the donkey with Joseph walking behind. After days of this brutal travel, they finally arrive in the dark. And the climax of this whole struggle? Joseph desperately walks all over town, knocking on doors of houses and shops, just pleading for a room. But they are turned away everywhere. They are dead tired, desperate, and feeling completely hopeless. Section 3. Born in a manger. The humble birth. So this brings us to the climax of their long journey, a moment of deep, profound vulnerability that perfectly illustrates the core theme we're talking about. We naturally expect a mighty king to be born amidst palaces, royal beds, unimaginable wealth and power. But the reality of this story? After all that desperate searching, the only shelter Joseph can finally scrape together is an empty barn built for cows. He gathers some fresh straw just to make a tiny bed in a manger, which, by the way, is literally an animal feeding trough. And it's here, in this incredibly rugged, unlikely setting, that Mary actually gives birth to Jesus. The narrative intentionally places the Savior of the world not in some grand seat of power, but right there in a humble manger. It's a brilliant literary device, choosing to emphasize deep physical vulnerability over earthly might. Section 4. The Shepherd's Revelation. News on the Hill. So, after all that, who actually gets the news first? You'd think the local authorities, right? Or certainly the wealthy elites. Nope. The grand announcement goes to some local shepherds who are just out looking for their sheep on a nearby hill. Out of nowhere, they are blinded by a brilliant light from the sky. They see this beautiful angel with long golden hair and silver wings, wearing a shimmering white and gold dress that's just sparkling in the moonlight. As you'd expect, the shepherds are amazed, but also completely terrified. The angel gives them exact, step-by-step instructions. First, do not be afraid. Second, a baby boy named Jesus, the Savior of the world, is born tonight. Third, and this is the key identifying detail, look for a baby wrapped in clothes lying in a manger. And finally, go and spread this happy news to everyone you can. The shepherds are absolutely overjoyed. They didn't wait around or second-guess it. They immediately took off running toward Bethlehem to find the baby exactly as the angel had described. And when they finally found the barn, they praised him and they bowed down in worship right there to the baby lying in the animal trough. Section 5, The Wise Men's Journey, the Star and the King. All right, now the narrative zooms way out to bring in our final set of visitors, and this adds a whole new layer of royal danger to the story. 3 wise men, traveling on camels across the desert, suddenly see a flash of light and this incredibly bright, unfamiliar star. They know the ancient prophecies, and they know this Star of Bethlehem means the King of the Jews has been born. Looking for answers, they go and speak to the current ruler, King Herod. Now, the source describes Herod as a deeply selfish and evil king. He tells these wise men to go find the baby so he can worship him too. But in reality, he is secretly plotting to kill the child because he's terrified of losing his kingdom to a rival. Completely unaware of the king's dark plot, the wise men follow that star for several days until it stops right over that humble little barn. When they walk in and find the baby, they smile at Mary, bow down in deep reverence, and present these incredible gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The absolute crucial takeaway here is that these are highly, highly unusual gifts to give a newborn baby, especially one sleeping in a cow barn. These were incredibly precious, immensely valuable items that historically were reserved exclusively for royalty. So even though he's literally surrounded by an agricultural setting, the wise men fully grasp the grand purpose of his birth and treat him exactly like a king. It just completely reinforces the paradox of his arrival. And this brings us right back full circle to the very core of our explainer. The narrative holds these 2 massive extremes in perfect, delicate tension. On one side, you have the grand titles: Savior of the world, King of the Jews, Son of God. And on the exact opposite side, the gritty physical reality of his humble beginnings: a sleepy little town, a grueling donkey ride, an empty barn, and a literal straw bed. This contrast is absolutely not an accident. It is the entire point of the story. It completely upends our human idea of how historical power and legacy are supposed to begin. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final, thought-provoking question. How often do the most monumental stories in human history actually begin in the most ordinary, entirely overlooked places? The Christmas story shows us, plain as day, that incredibly great things can have very small, incredibly humble beginnings. The mightiest figures don't always arrive in gleaming palaces. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the dark, in an empty cow barn. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and hey, keep looking for the big stories in the small places.